All right, this thing is asking us for an equation for a horizontal line that passes through the specific point. First thing I would do, you don't have to do this, but it's just nice to visualize it. I'm plotting the point, over 2, down 4, plot a point. To draw a horizontal line through that, even though my graph doesn't look great, that red line is cutting through the y-axis. Therefore, it is the y value of -4. That's your equation. 15, so that's the answer. 15, we're going over 3, down 7. I'm going to shortcut this. Down 7. Put our point. So picture is not drawn to scale. And this is asking for a vertical line going through that point. Vertical line. Oh, goodness. Can't draw a straight line today. Vertical line. That vertical line is cutting through the x value of 3. That's your solution. So those will go pretty fast. Now it's multiple choice though, so it'll give you all 4 options, including the wrong answer. So you can always ignore the multiple choice options and then do the work off to the side and match it to the correct answer. Point slope is a problem that you guys, or an equation that you guys have used plenty of. It's on the board for you, so that's going to be given to you tomorrow. The equation in point slope form that passes through the point and has a slope of -5. The first thing you want to do is rewrite the equation. Y minus y equals m times x minus x. In class, we always made this y and this x bold because they were the two that stayed the same in the problem. Everything else we plug in. So the first thing we're going to plug in is the slope. The slope is -5. X stays the same. Y stays the same. And then the point is the last thing that we have to plug in. The point is an x and a y. The tricky part with this is that when you go from the point to the equation, you have to do the opposite sign. So instead of a regular x value of +2, when you put it into the equation, it was -2. Instead of a regular -1 for the y value, when you put it in the equation, it's +1. So in other words, these are opposite when you plug them in, okay? So just remember to flip it, because you will have multiple choice options that will have the most common wrong answer, which would be y minus 1 is equal to -5, x plus 2. So it's checking to see that you understand to flip the sign. So for number 17, we're going to use the process of elimination because we have a couple points on here. What's nice is if you look at each of the equations, all of them have the exact same slope. So you do not have to calculate the slope, even though you are given 2 points. Okay. So we've got 2's all across the board, and then we are only using, there's 2 points. One of them's using 2 and 24, or excuse me, 2 and 20. The other one is -6 and 4. Now, if you listen to what I said a minute ago, you have to just be careful to do the opposite of. So that means in the equation, the x value of -6 is going to be a +6. So that means my x values go inside the parentheses, which eliminates b and d. X values go inside the parentheses, so b and d are eliminated. The last thing that we have to do is decide if it's choice A or C. The y value in the equation is, or excuse me, in the point is 4. It has to be the opposite in the equation, so -4. To find the x-intercept, we're going to do y equals 0, plug it in, and then I'll eliminate some of our answers. So 8x minus 6 times 0 is equal to -48. When you do that, 6 and 0 are going to go away. You're left with 8x is equal to -48. Divide both sides by 8, you get x is equal to -6. So that means I can actually eliminate several options. So the x-intercept of 8 is out. X-intercept of -8 is out, meaning we have C and D left. The only difference between C and D are the y-intercepts being negative or positive. So then if we wanted to figure out the last piece is to solve for the y-intercept. So if you solve for the y-intercept, you set x equal to 0. So 8 times 0 minus 6y is equal to -48. So when you do that, your 8 times 0 goes away. You get -6y is equal to -48. Divide both sides by -6. And yes, you were right. It would be answer choice D because y would be equal to 8. Number 19 is asking you if something is arithmetic. So not arithmetic, but arithmetic. In order to know if something is arithmetic, that means it goes up or down by the same amount. So it's a pattern. It's basically like a slope, finding a slope of something. So for this, there is a pattern in option A, but it goes back and forth. So option A is out. B, the pattern in the numbers is that it's being multiplied by 2. Multiplied by 2 is not the same as adding or subtracting by 2. So since we're multiplying by 2, that's not an option. Then we look at C and D. So you look to see if you're adding or subtracting the same amount. To go from -7 to -10, you're subtracting 3. To go from -10 to -13, you're subtracting 3, and so on and so forth. So that lines up. C is your choice. Just to be sure, you're going to double check the last answer. To go from 5 to 6, that's 1. 6 to 8 is 2. 8 to 11 is 3, and so on. It is adding by a number, but it's not the same number each time. It has to be the same number in order for it to be arithmetic. Number 20 is using words to figure out what an equation would be. An online store charges $6 to ship one box, so that's the starting value. Each additional box costs $4 to ship. So this is $4 extra per box. This is very similar to the slope. This is the change in the numbers. It asks for an explicit formula to represent the situation. All right, so that means the change per box, or however many boxes there are, is 4 per box. So the change in our arithmetic sequence, and our arithmetic sequence is on the board. This is going to be given to you or written up there for you on Thursday. The change is the D value in our sequence. The D value is going to be in front of the parentheses. So 4 is the change, which means option C is out. So then we have the choice between the other 3. Out of these 3, we've got a +4, a +4, and then answer choice A has a -4. Well, it's not. They're deducting $4 per box. They're adding it. So that's out. And then we have 2 choices, B and D. The change between those, or the difference between those, is the starting value. So the starting value was $6 to ship one box, and then 4 per every other box. All right, number 21, it asks for the type of correlation. So all of these are correlations. Correlations really is looking for an R value. It's looking for positive and negative. If you were to draw a line of best fit through these lines, or through these points, that would be a positive sloped line. Therefore, it has a positive correlation. On number 22, it asks for a weak positive correlation. So there's 2 things here. The fact that it's asking for a positive means that the R value is going to be positive and not negative. So B and D are out. If it is weak, it is closer to 0. The number is closer to 0. If it's positive or strong, that's going to be closer to 1. So A is the answer because it's closer to 0. On number 23, it asks for a strong negative correlation. Since it's negative, we're looking for only negative numbers, so we eliminate A and C. And then if it's a strong correlation, it's closer to 1 or -1. In this case, that means D would be our answer choice. Number 24, we're going to look for whether or not something is a function. In order to tell if something is a function or not, for every x, there's only one y, meaning you do not have double x's. So we're going to check the x values. 1 only appears once, 2, 3, 4, 5. They only appear one time in the x value, so this is a function. But this says select all but apply, so we want to make sure to go through each one of them. B, 2 shows up only once, but 6 shows up in 2 spots. So this one is not a function. For C, this is mapping notation. Each one of these arrows only has one arrow going from the x value. So that actually is a function. It would only be different, I'm going to erase this here in a second, if like you had 1 going to 1, but also going to 4. That's where a branch would go to 2 y values for a singular x. And then D also matches. So 1, 2, and 3, there's only one branch that goes from each of those. So it's a function. So you have 3 answer choices for this one. Domain and range are the x values and the y values. The x values in this case are going to be the numbers on the left, and we write them in order from smallest to largest. So this is -3, -2, -1, 0, and 1. So these are the x's, that's the domain, and then the y's are the range values. So it's -6, -1, 0, I don't know why it has a negative there, 3, and 15. 26 and 27, this is function notation. For function notation, it's really the same as saying x equals a number, but it's written in a fancy way. So if we have, I'm going to enlarge this so we can see it a little bit better. If we have evaluate f of -4, that means we plug in a -4 where we see x in the f function. So this is our f function. It's going to be equal to -3 times -4 plus 2. Just make sure that you multiply the -3 times the -4. That gives you 12 plus 2, which would be a grand total of 14. The next one, b, this is g of 2, which means we're plugging it into that equation. So -5 times 2 minus 7. -5 times 2 is -10, minus 7 gives me a grand total of -17. 27 is honestly just you recognizing that this equation in function notation is very much the same as a y equals mx plus b. So the slope is 3, and the y-intercept is 2. Systems of equations are really looking for where x and y crisscross. In other words, where x marks the spot. In this case, these two lines are intended to crisscross at that specific point. That x value is at -2, and the y value is +2. So x marks the spot. So for question 29, it's asking you which method would actually work the best, but it doesn't tell you that you have to solve it. So each time you're looking at these questions, there's going to be different forms. Elimination is the right method because we have a +2 and a -2. So if you eliminate it by going straight down in the problem, adding, it would fix it. If you added straight down, you would end up eliminating that variable and getting x by itself. For the second one, it is graphing. And we know that it's graphing because both of these have y equals by themselves. The last one is going to be substitution. And the reason that it's going to be substitution is that one of the variables is already solved for x. So you would take that, substitute it in. Number 30, it says Amy wants to eliminate the variable y from the system. System's given to you by elimination. First, you will have to multiply one of the equations by a number, I can't speak, which step will eliminate y by adding. So that means your y values have to be exactly the same. The difference between this is that we have a -4y, and then the second one is a +2y. So there is a difference of a multiple of 2 between those. So you're going to have to take the second equation and multiply it by something, which means we can eliminate options A and B because we're not going to change those. We're just going to change the second equation. And in that case, we're going to multiply by a +2. The reason we would multiply by a +2 is we would end up with a -4y and a +4y. And those two things, if you added straight down, they would eliminate from each other. So answer choice C is what we're looking for here. 31 and 32 are kind of involved. You've got to go through and do a lot of steps to solve the system. You can do these on Desmos too and graph them and get the solution by figuring out where x marks the spot, or you can do substitution. In this first one, we would take everything that y is equal to, put a box around it, and substitute in where y is. So that means I'm going to plug it in right here. So -2x plus 4 times 1/2 x minus 4 is equal to -16. So now you'd have to distribute. So this one's kind of tough. So you'd end up with -2x, and then you'd have plus 4 times 1/2. So you could do that on the calculator. 4 times 1/2 is 2x And then 4 times -4 is -16. Don't be afraid to use a calculator when you can. That -16 on the other side drops down. But if you were to simplify this, a 2x and a positive 2x, when you combine like terms, goes away, leaving you with -16 is equal to -16. This is a true statement. Anytime you end up with a true statement for a system of equations, that means infinitely many solutions. Infinitely many solutions. If you had typed this into Desmos, what would have happened is you would have had 2 lines right on top of each other, meaning they were parallel lines. So something like that you can see on Desmos. Number 32, you can't add straight down yet because no variable would be eliminated, but you could multiply the top equation by 2, and you have to multiply it all the way across because then you'd have a 2x and a -2x, which would then eliminate. So if I multiplied everything by 2, I'd get 2x plus 8y, because you got to do it to both, all 3 actually, is equal to 8. Then I'm going to line up the one that was underneath of it, so -2x plus 8y is equal to 8. If you do that and add straight down, you're going to end up getting 16y is equal to 16 because your x's eliminated. Divide both sides by 16, you'd get y is equal to 1. With a system of equations, you have to have an x and you have to have a y. So we need to take this y value and plug it back in to the original equation. So the original equation is right here. X plus 4 times our y value of 1 is equal to 4. So that's x plus 4 is equal to 4. Subtracting 4 from both sides, x is equal to 0. So your coordinate is 0, 1. Again, you can do that on Desmos. X marks the spot. Number 1 says pick the inequality that the graph represents. You could recognize a couple things for this. The first thing I notice is that it is shaded above. If it is shaded above, that means it's either going to be greater than or equal to. So I'm going to eliminate option A because that's less than. In this case, it is a solid line, so that means it's actually going to be greater than or equal to. Oh, it was also not B. So that means answer choice D is our answer. Next question, 34. There's a straight line in this that I'm going to use to identify at least half of the solutions. That's the one at x equals 3. So x is either less than or greater than. First thing you should notice is that it is a solid line. So that means all the ones that don't have the line underneath of them, like B, that doesn't have an equals underneath of it, B is out. The other 3 are pretty much the same, with the exception of the inequality symbol. So that left-hand side is what's actually shaded. So we're shaded on the left, which means that our inequality symbol for the vertical line is less than. So that means option A is out. Then we have a couple of things to go through. This one can be tricky. If you look at the symbols, they're both greater than. If you look at the y-intercepts, they're both positive 2. The only difference between these two answers is that one of them has a positive slope and the other one has a negative slope. For this graph, this is a positive slope. So that means our answer choice is D. The last ones are the ones that we did last week. So it was our last bit of content. Anytime you have a number outside of grouping symbols, this is for next semester too, that number is either going to go up or down. Since this is positive, it's going to go up 3, which really means every other equation says down, so they all get eliminated. Answer choice C is the only one that's accurate. If you weren't sure, you could always double check that by looking at the number on the inside. The inside number, even though it says positive 2, you're actually going to go to the left 2 units, and that's what this tells us. So anytime you have grouping symbols, you're going to do the opposite of what the sign says. So question number 36, we're going to use that same principle. We've got the equation y equals, there is a V shape to it, which means we need absolute value bars. There's no y value that's shifted, so there's nothing on the outside. It is moved over 1 unit along the x-axis. If it's moving to the right, that means it's opposite inside parentheses. So instead of going +1, we would write it as x minus 1. That's not the only change though. This graph is slightly bigger or wider than the previous graph. An absolute value graph always goes up and over 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. This graph isn't going up and over 1, it's actually going over 2 and up 1, which means that's going to be the number that goes in front, also known as our A value. So it's kind of like the slope of your absolute value. 37, this is what we did before where we solved. You have to get the absolute value bars by themselves. To do that, you divide both sides by 3, and you get absolute value of x is equal to 4. Remember though, this has 2 bars. Every time it has 2 bars, that means you have 2 equations. You have x equals 4, but you also have x is equal to -4. 2 bars, 2 equations, 2 answers. 38 is almost identical to that one, except it has an inequality symbol. You get the absolute values by themselves. In order to do that, you have to add 3 to both sides. You'd get the absolute value is greater than 7, 2 bars, 2 equations. The first one is copy and paste exactly as it's supposed to be. The second one is x is less than -7. So you have to change both of those. So it's a flip and a flip. And then it's back to what we did at the very beginning, where we have to do either open or close dots. We will have an open dot at both values because there's not an inequality underneath there. And this first one that says x is greater than 7, that means all the numbers bigger than 7. X is less than -7 means all the numbers smaller than -7.